Peace and love. Greetings, everyone. Just to introduce myself again, my name is Cameron Nesmith. I am 25 years old, originally from Atlanta, Georgia. I received my Bachelor of Arts here from Morehouse College in 2020, where I earned that degree in Africana Studies. I'm a recent fall graduate, a 2023 graduate of the University of Georgia, where I earned my degree in historic preservation. And today we have on the panel Ahmad Ward, the Executive Director of Historic Mitchellville Freedom Park, Dr. Robert Adams, Executive Director of the Penn Center, and Javier Wallace, who's a master storyteller of Black Austin and more from Duke University. And just to begin, I want these panelists to briefly introduce themselves, but within introducing yourselves, can you talk a little bit about your history with your education, your careers overall, your current job titles, and just overall scope of work?
Okay, I'm Robert Adams. I'm the Executive Director of the Penn Center in St. Helena Island, South Carolina. I was born in Bangor, Maine, grew up in the military, and I'm a graduate of University of Texas, both for a PhD in anthropology and an undergraduate degree in sociology, with a master's degree from University of Florida. In between there, Dr. Hodge was my classmate and mentor, yeah.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Glad to be here. Thank you, Dr. Claiborne, for the invitation. My name is Javier Wallace. I am most currently, I'm like multi-hyphenate, multi-passionate, so let me just get that out the way now. I am the race and sport postdoctoral associate at Duke University in the program in education. I am also the founder and principal guide of Black Austin Tours, which I started in 2019 in my hometown of Austin, Texas. I'm also the co-founder of Afro-Latinx Travel, where we, like in Black Austin Tours, center and engage the histories, experiences, and contributions of people of African descent in the Latin American diaspora, and also, as I mentioned, with Black Austin Tours. And I'm pretty sure we'll go more into the work that I'm doing in these specific places. But in addition to that, I forgot, I said multi-hyphenate. I'm also a researcher and scholar as well, too. And so I'm finishing up my current book under contract with Duke University Press on basketball trafficking or human trafficking in U.S. high school basketball with the F1 student visa, following the lines of Black Panamanian youth that are coming to the United States in search of their American hoop dreams, if you will, and how they get caught up in this multi-billion-dollar sport industry. Also, how the immigration system does not work well with these systems and these young people that are in pursuit, and how they can find themselves in vulnerable situations and being exploited. I am a huge sport lover. I often tell people I'm the product of sport and multiple racisms. I say that because my parents met on a tennis court in segregated East Austin, which was a formerly official Negro district in Austin, Texas, but they met in the 1970s. My father is from the Republic of Panama, and he migrated to Houston-Tillotson, a HBCU in Austin, to play tennis, where he was among many other Black Panamanians who have been coming to historically Black colleges and universities in the South since the 1930s, as I'm continuing to do research, and where he also led a program for Black youth in East Austin to play tennis, where he met my mother. And you're looking at the result of all those different histories coinciding. And then I had the opportunity to play sport as well, too. I went to Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University. I wasn't going to do this. I promise. I told myself don't do this. But I just heard another presentation talking about the best. But this is good to be at Morehouse, so don't get me wrong. I played football at FAMU. I did my bachelor's and master's at Florida A&M, and then I did my PhD at the University of Texas at Austin, so hook 'em horns. And again, we'll probably talk way more about the things that I'm doing and how it engages with everybody else's work on the panel, and super excited to be here, super excited to share the stage with such distinguished individuals, so thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Ahmad Ward. I'm the executive director for historic Mitchellville Freedom Park. Mitchellville is the first town of self-governing formerly enslaved people in the United States, founded in 1862 on Hilton Head Island after the Battle of Port Royal. This is, of course, established 2 months before the Emancipation Proclamation. So these people were freed before they were directly freed, back when they were considered contraband of war, right after being freed from by the Union Army. Me personally, I am a native of Elizabeth City, North Carolina. I went to Elizabeth City State University, and I had to slow down because my cousins are here. We always say Elizabeth City because we push things together in the South. So Elizabeth City State University, and I got my master's degree in museum studies from the actual HU. I wish Kamal was in here right now. I wish Kamal was in here so I could talk to him about Howard and Hampton and the Strat. You know, there's a tiered system there. But I was an art major, kind of tripped and fell into this history thing. I spent I was ducking teaching art in the state of North Carolina. Ended up going to Birmingham, where I spent all of my time in classrooms as someone talking to students in the Alabama area about the civil rights movement as part of the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. I ran the education department there for about 15 years. And then this opportunity came across my desk, and I was just talking with the good brother Javier a minute ago about how I hadn't heard of any of this. You know, any decent educator is going to try to do some connecting, cause and effect. If you got the civil rights movement, it goes back to segregation, which goes back to Jim Crow and the Black Codes and Reconstruction and Civil War. So I'm going all the way back to the Civil War. I never heard anything about Mitchellville. You know, this town had 300 acres. Each family got a quarter acre of a lot to build and grow on. They had a mayor council form of government. They had organized trash pickup. You know, William Lloyd Garrison spoke at the first church there. Clara Barton, who started the American Red Cross, was highly familiar with Mitchellville. At the Battle of the Columbia River Raid in 1863 that Harriet Tubman co-led, they freed 756 people. She personally led 100 of those individuals back to Hilton Head to settle at Mitchellville. You don't know any of that stuff. And so I will admit to being slightly perturbed as a pseudo-historian, not knowing any of that stuff. So it's been kind of our mission to make sure that people understand, not just in South Carolina, but across the country, the important part of this history as a linchpin site in our American story. The 4 tenets that are going to govern the interpretation of this site are freedom, democracy, citizenship, and opportunity. Those are really basic American tenets that everybody can connect with, no matter where you come from. We all understand what opportunity looks like. We all understand what freedom looks like. And citizenship is a very important part of what we're trying to do, because in our eyes, this is the first time that Africans in America had a chance to feel like citizens of something that they helped build and govern on their own. So we do know through archaeology there were houses on that site. We're actually actively working on some construction of ghosted structures of these homes right now. We know there was a church on our site. We also found a 4,000-year-old indigenous imprint in that same area where the church is. And so we're doing all of that work. We will be building a 18,000 square foot interpretive center to talk about the history of Mitchellville, its connection to Gullah Geechee culture, and why it's still important to talk about these things right now. So this is all coming down the pipeline. I won't steal any of the good brothers' thunder, who's been to the site. So we're going to hand it back over to Cameron so we can get our conversation going. We're just really pleased to be here.
I appreciate y'all. And really to get started, I know being that this is not only a panel, but a symposium that is really focused on reclamation, remembrance, and telling our story, would you all mind talking about or elaborating on, I guess, what are the cultural influences, moments, and life experiences in your own livelihoods that allowed you to pursue such dynamic work?
Well, I guess I'm holding the mic. I'll go ahead. I kind of alluded to it a little earlier. I always loved history, but I was an art major. I thought I would do some things and do my own work on the side. But honestly, what really fueled this is being in that campus in Birmingham. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, it is on 16th Street, which is downtown Birmingham, directly across from the park, Kellingram Park, where kids were sprayed with fire hoses and bitten by German shepherds in May of 1963. Right next door to us is 16th Street Baptist Church, where 4 little girls were killed in a bombing in September of 1963. So we're at the epicenter of all of this important history there, and just being there and meeting all of these people. Like the first week, I walk into, well, not the first week, the first month, I walk into the archives, and Authorine Lucy Foster is sitting there volunteering. Now, Authorine Lucy integrated the University of Alabama, and she's just sitting there helping out, you know, and, you know, you do that dumb stuff. Do you know who you are? You know, obviously, she's been there her whole life. But just meeting those kind of people, and Fred Shuttlesworth, who was the backbone of the civil rights movement, who doesn't get enough light. He was the person who was involved in everything. And he made the Birmingham connection run. Like, just getting this history of our folks that I had never really, I thought I knew something about the civil rights movement until I started talking about it. And I realized how much of it I honestly did not know. And so that has kind of formed the way I approach the telling of our history. And the notion that we had people growing up, kids growing up in that city who did not know a thing. And it has gotten exacerbated because it is now becoming a problem to talk about our history. We are allowing people to tell us that us examining our history is cleaving to victimhood, instead of taking that history and expanding ourselves. You know, I talk to my kids about this history, not so they can wallow in victimhood, is so they can know where they come from, who they are, and how to move forward. And so it has been a teaching tool my entire life, and it continues to be. So this move going 100 years earlier, dealing with the 19th century stuff, and being in the Low Country with such a rich history and culture. And, you know, it just is drilling it home for us. Like, I'm so glad that we had Kamal's session before this, because it really kind of sets the tone for what we're talking about. And depending on the scholarship, and I'll hand this off, anywhere between 25 to 40% of all African Americans can trace their lineage back to South Carolina. You know, we talked about Mobile earlier, and now talking about Charleston. These are the ports we were brought to. Most of us don't understand that, you know, and we can't just pick up a book and trace our history. You know, we have to dig. You know, we have to use ancestry. We have to go back into Civil War records. We got to dig through all of these things to try to find our connections. And even then, we're only halfway there. And so, being that this town is a part of all of these numerous black towns who, you know, would not get any kind of light unless we really push for it. My passion is to making sure that folks understand the complexity of American life for black people. And in that, we should be absolutely uncompromising and unapologetic in how we talk about it. And we cannot allow outside forces to tell us that it's not worthy, or we're being a victim because we want to know about where we came from. And if we don't push back, nobody else will.
Thank you. I think for me, the influence that I have, it comes from my lifelong journey that I'm on to know more about myself and where I've come from. And as I mentioned before, that moment when my parents met on that tennis court in Austin, there were so many things that had to happen over the course of their lives, over the course of their parents' lives, over the course of their parents' lives, to have them meet whenever they met in the 1970s. My father, as I mentioned, coming from the Republic of Panama, and my mother somebody from Austin, Texas. Both of these individuals, descendants of individuals who have been forcefully removed from the African continent and forced into this space as labor and built communities, has always been a motivating factor for me in thinking and doing in the spaces that I've always been in. And so I started, if you will, just by always going to family reunions in Central Texas, where this is the space where I know the majority of my ancestors on my mother's side, that whose names I can call, whose ancestry I can trace, are in Central Texas. Knowing that as a force of domestic slave trade primarily, that they were forced into Texas from other parts of what becomes the United States or are the United States. But Central Texas for me is a very special place, a home place, because of the amount of people that I descend from, that I can go visit where their final resting places are on the ground, are in Central Texas. And so we've always been in that space and heard these stories from the people that we descend from. I mean, I never can recall a time when they're not telling us a story about them times, or when they were in the country doing this, that, and the third. And so as I progressed in my life and continued to go to FAMU and get some more education and play football and do all those different things, I had never forgotten these stories that I heard and seeking out more information. And so when I moved to I moved to Panama, where my father is from, and I wanted to know more about that part of who I was and where I came from. And I learned more. I had a chance to sit with my grandparents. I had a chance for them to tell me the stories that I heard my African American grandparents tell me about how they grew up and what they were going through. And I was just hearing all these connecting stories through different languages, through different borders, but very similar in what it is that they were doing. And I had never let that go. And I lived in Panama, so I was living in a destination, if you will, where people like to visit, but there's also people who live in these spaces, who are of these spaces, who don't have the privileges to be able to travel and go elsewhere. But people were coming, and people wanted to know what was going on and black people were coming from the U.S. primarily, who I was engaging with, and I started just, informally doing tours, honestly. And somebody told me to charge for it, and I was like, cool, let's do it. And then it started to grow in that way. And then when I finally come back to Austin to do my PhD at University of Texas at Austin, as a broke grad student at this point in time, and also learning more about these deep histories in my classroom settings, like Black Education in America with Dr. Keflin Brown. And so all of these histories were coming alive through these texts, these deep things, but there were so many stories that I knew from the people that I come from, that I had sat around my entire life, and I was just connecting. And so it gave me an opportunity to speak outside and talk with people, engage with people. And so my influences have always been based in my experiences. Like I say, I research a lot about sport. I will reiterate that sport, in the way that black folks have used sport over time, have allowed me to be here in this space. So I continually to dive and think about those connections and what do borders mean or what do borders not mean. And so I always incorporate who I am into the work that I do, and that's my primary influence, always, is how I'm related to it. And I'm just in such a fortunate position, to be quite honest, in the things that I've been able to do. And some people in the academic world will frown on this thing called me search, but I'm so glad that I can focus on me, and not only focus on me, but can use the people and the stories that have made me as an actual person, be able to go out and teach other people. And use my story, the stories of the people who we'll never mention as these influential figures in our histories. But for me, they have been super influential and have done similar things as these persons that we could name on the back of our hands. And so it's just been a privilege and an honor to be able to call out these individuals' names and narrate their histories to folks from throughout the world, and then recognize them and uphold them the same way they would do somebody else. So if I can't think about me and my relation to where I am, I don't have any other influences, and that has been my zero. That's my starting point every time. It's like, where am I situated?
Wow. It's funny because for me, I think that I started off in the 80s as an anti-apartheid activist. and then started traveling the world, started going to Haiti in the late 1980s, trying to figure out social change there. And all of this kind of came from the military background that I grew up in, of moving from place to place and trying to put all these sort of fragmented experiences together. And, you know, in the process, I've been fortunate to work with some of my heroes, including, you know, Archbishop Tutu in South Africa, John Lewis, folks like that. You know, for a while I was executive on loan at the King Center here in Atlanta. And, but what's been fascinating is in the ways in which I've discovered myself along this journey, and discovered some of the complexities of my familial history. You know, like Javier, you know, part of my family's from the Central Texas, East Texas area, sharecroppers that, you know, moved around that region picking cotton until cotton kind of basically died in that region. And then on my maternal side, we were refugees from enslavement. My ancestors on that side fought in the American Revolution on the side of the British to earn their freedom, and then were exiled out of New York in 1783 and appear in the Book of Negroes. So it's like some of these things, I knew about them as abstract ideas, but I discovered about the impact of them through becoming a researcher. It opened up my own ways in which I could understand my personal history. And then to even think about now, as I'm in South Carolina, to think about my South Carolina heritage. And to think about, so like one of my ancestors from South Carolina is Paris O'Ree. He left the plantation in 1778, went to Charleston, joined with the British forces. He left behind a brother, a sister, and his parents on the O'Ree plantation, Colonel Elias O'Ree, right? And that's spelled, you know, they were French Huguenots, so that's spelled Horry. When he went to go, you know, get on the ship to go to Canada, in the Book of Negroes, they wrote it down Oree, right? And how I know a lot about this kind of history is partly through happenstance. Another ancestor, another relative is Willie O'Ree, the first black person to play in the NHL in Boston, Massachusetts with the Bruins. Hockey integrated before baseball integrated in Boston. You know, if you could believe that, right? So, you know, you find out about a lot of these different pieces, and then through the travel, I got married for the first time in Haiti back in the, way back in the day. I won't even date myself anymore. But, I discovered, and again, this is, when my wife was alive, we didn't really talk about it. But subsequently, when I was trying to figure out the history for my son, I figured out that she's a direct descendant of Dessalines in Haiti, and from that region. And so to try to think about how all these things come together, how all of us have these connections to big history, and we got to figure ourselves out. And to really think about the real frontier, I think next is the water. The water is what we have to open up. It's the place that we have to kind of explore in deeper terms. Even in terms of where I was born at, Bangor, Maine. An Afro-Portuguese sailor was the explorer that first came there in 1525. Left Coruña in Spain after having sailed with Magellan in that around the world trip. So if we keep looking back at all this, we'll keep finding ourselves, and then we got to keep moving back between big history and personalized history. The me has to be discovered. So.
I appreciate y'all. And this next question, it's kind of a two-parter, but I really want you to answer it as you feel. In regards, so what does your historic site have to offer in your work in general, have to offer to heritage tourism? And I guess in working to cultivate, further promote, and advocate for your work, and your particular sites of memory, how do you keep interpretation and site enhancement, how do you keep it authentic while navigating the difficulties of also making it mainstream or trying to streamline it to the public?
So at the Penn Center started as a school in 1862 on St. Helena after the Union troops came in, and we had the great skedaddle where white folks left, right? So we're a byproduct of, in some ways we can say pre-Reconstruction, Reconstruction, right? So part of what we have to do is we have to keep thinking about what Reconstruction was, because in some ways Reconstruction is three different things. There's a period of Reconstruction, that formal classification of Reconstruction, 1866, 1877, right? Which was sort of overturned and demolished by the rise of Jim Crow after that and white supremacy. So that's one one thing that Reconstruction is. Reconstruction is also an overarching set of ideals: full access to the ballot box, full equality, the right to enter into contracts, the rights to not be 3/5 of a person, right? That it's funny today, as we were riding over here from the hotel, the Supreme Court is taking on these same questions that are from the 14th Amendment and the Constitution. So that idea about these ideals beyond that period. But the third thing is Reconstruction as a site of struggle about the freedom and the value of black people. And what do I mean by that? I mean that we've been caught up in an idea of Reconstruction as a failure. When Reconstruction, and that's a myth. Reconstruction was one of the most dynamic, most powerful moments of both black leadership and American democracy. And before Dr. King died in 1968 in February in New York, he gave a speech about Du Bois. And he was celebrating Du Bois and how Du Bois came down south, could have had an easy life in the north, but he wanted to sacrifice for his people. He wanted to serve his people. And King points out that Black Reconstruction was Du Bois's greatest book. And the reason why he said that is because this idea of what Du Bois was doing was dismantling this myth of black inferiority. This idea of black folks, if you give them freedom, they don't know what to do with it, right? And he goes through and says, we have to continue to take on this idea about what Black Reconstruction was. We got to highlight how public education came out of Reconstruction and how other kinds of really democratic policies came out of that. And at the same time, to figure out the ways in which today Reconstruction, access to the ballot box, full equality, those things are under threat. You know, every time you turn around, they're trying to redistrict us, they're trying to gerrymander us, they're trying to dilute our voting power. And so those are the kind of things that even today we're still fighting around. And so for the Penn Center, we both have to sort of like figure out in land ownership. Don't let me forget land ownership. I don't want Queen Quet to, for the next year be on the island telling me, but land ownership. And we're still fighting those things. The idea that black folks, because for too long in this country, we've been placeholders of land. As land was not valuable, we could hold on to it. As soon as somebody else wanted to put a condo up, they could, utilize us to move us out. And that's that kind of idea of inequitable progress we have to fight against. And so the Penn Center stands, part of the way we do the historical stuff, we also do the political work, because that political work is super important to not just sort of say it's black folks ought to own land, but to actually fight the battles to make sure that black folks are in the position to maintain their right to the land. And that's under severe threat right now. Yeah.
I am the founder of Black Austin Tours. I don't operate a historical site at all. the origins of Black Austin Tours is literally me lacing up my boots and saying, let's go. And go out on the street screaming and talking and developing this ethos that I've now used called disrupting public space. Because I wasn't in a position to go to inherit any type of site. It was just like, let's go. And so the way I'll approach the question is what I've decided to do, or what I've found to work, if you will, to encourage the public, was the strength of social media, to be quite honest. I decided, especially when the pandemic, I started Black Austin Tours before the pandemic and before the social protest of 2020. And so I started on Airbnb because it was an easy platform to get going on the experiences sector. That's where Master Storyteller actually comes from. It comes from Airbnb. They gave me that tag because they were going through their reviews on experiences, and they recognized that I had the best reviews around the nation and experiences for storytelling. And so they came to Austin and they wanted to do a video with me about how I do what I do and to use it as a teaching tool. And so they put that nickname on there. You have to say that because, you know, people give themselves nicknames, but you know, you're supposed to let somebody give you a name. So, so I ain't make that up. They did. I use it though, because, you know, it sounds good sometimes. And so that's how I got started, was literally lacing it up, going out there and walking and talking and screaming, and really going to sites that are public with historical markers in these public spaces in Austin, and educating folks that these markers are all written with biases and perspective of the person who wrote them. And oftentimes they have excluded our narratives, excluded our contributions, and people who do engage with these signs, if they ever do, will walk away from this space thinking in the way that they're being directed to speak. And I was just going and speaking back and uploading it on social media at the same time. And then also doing other posts on social media where people were saying like, wow, I never knew this about the city that I live in, or people who were visiting, like I want to know more about that. And so that's how I've approached it. I have now since been approached by a lot of historical sites, mostly are white-owned historical sites, and I've had to really challenge my idea of thinking about how to work with these historical sites, especially in the moment that we're in, especially as a result of the 2020 social movements and this shift towards thinking about Black stories and Black people at a time. But that was me, how I mobilized and still mobilize and get a lot of people to come on these experiences, is through the power of social media and just making some of these histories accessible, engaging, if you will, and that just brings a lot of people in, and I don't have the constraints, if you will, or tied to a board that's invested in what it is that we do. And as the business grows, which it is growing, as we finally hired our first full-time guide, a student, a HBCU student, a Houston-Tillotson student in Austin, you know, we will start having to think more about engaging with spaces. And so for me, it's just been a pure disruption of these public spaces, and then partnering with historical Black spaces and historical Black organizations and institutions that want more visibility. I mean, I get requests from a lot of Black people in Austin that are preserving this home, preserving this something, and they want somebody to come talk about it. And I'm always like, you know, if we good, I get up on social media and scream, you know, we can do it, or I'll go out there and take some people, like, cool, let's do it if we can support it. And so that's how I approach it, is really just making this accessible as possible and letting people engage with the tools that they're already engaging with, which is social media, Instagram, TikTok, and I'll just put it up there and let them come see what happens after.
Mitchellville provides something for people that is hard for them to find, and that is a positive slant during one of the most chaotic, horrific parts of our history, because you had these folks who took over this property. I mean, really quick story. Ormsby Mitchell, who was a Union general and an astronomer and an abolitionist, is the one who started the town. He because of things that were happening in Beaufort and the push from the Gideons and other folks to get newly freed black people self-sufficient so that other folks would not think that we had to be on the hook for taking care of them after they were freed. He saw an opportunity, gave these people 200-300 acres of property and set forth to get built, things of that nature. But he dies 45 days into the whole thing from yellow fever. And so it's named Mitchellville in his honor, and the people who are there keep it pushing. But it provides a story about folks exhibiting the necessary willpower to create a civilization, a community that is self-contained, self-sustaining, and is the power in that when everything else around them is complete and utter horror and chaos. And there were, people don't know this. Did any of you know that Hilton Head was the Department of the South, the Union Army? I know you knew. I know you knew. But most people don't know that. I didn't find out till I moved to the area. There were 40,000 Union troops on Hilton Head. So these people were way safer than they can ever imagine that they were. And so one of the ways where, I guess it kind of solidifies us is it is a story where these folks were flourishing. Like the reason there's no structures in Mitchellville is because of a hurricane that happened in 1893, not that the place just dissolved. He had almost 30 years of kinship that's happening there. Even after the Union Army leaves in 1868, the people were able to keep this thing going until 1893, without the economic engine that was there. And so it's a testament to the power of the people itself, which is why even though we're going to highlight Mitchell, we're going to keystone everything around the people because they're the ones who made this thing happen. And so that in itself gives us something to offer besides the fact that, it is a true unsung story about our collective history, how we are able to do these things. And, I get the underlining message there, try to tell this history with all the things that are happening around history and how can you be authentic when you have pushback. I can only speak for me and on our organization. We have been able to dig in some deep roots with people who have influence in the state of South Carolina. And they understand the power of what we can create. It did not hurt that when we did our master plan, we were able to put some real numbers on the table that says this is the possible economic impact of this organization to the state, which made them buy in. So it is a little harder to tug on Mitchellville's cape than some other places. Because we got some folks in the legislature that will smack their hand away. Everybody does not have that. We are fortunate to have that. And that does not absolve us from people who probably would still think that there's parts of that history that are dicey. So I'm going to let y'all in on a little secret. A little earlier I talked about freedom, democracy, citizenship, opportunity, how we can all connect. Those are very benign themes. But you can do a whole lot of stuff underneath those themes, can't you? And so we've done some uncomfortable conversations underneath those themes, but I can always point back to them, right? So that gives me the opportunity to talk about how freedom is affected across all things, right? And opportunity across all sections. And so we talked about land ownership and the barriers to that and how land has been taken away. Because I can always point back to those 4 tenets. You have to be able to, sometimes you got to hide the medicine in the honey, right? You put it out there for people to eat and draw them in with the honey. And then it's like, oh shoot, I tasted it. There's medicine in here. Doggone. I learned something. Or I got challenged to rethink something that I didn't originally try to think about. And so we want our organization, our site to be a place where real, meaningful dialogue can take place. We want to be able to build some bridges, but we're going to tell the truth. And the thing that I lean on is if you tell an objective history, it's hard to mess with objective history. Like Facts are facts, regardless. And so we're going to put the facts in front of people. Like, you can complain about opinions, but you can't complain about facts. Those things don't change. You know, you can feel a way about it, but the fact is what the fact is.
No, thank you very much. And everybody, please give the panelists a wonderful round of applause, please. And now we want to leave about 20 minutes. We want to be like 5 minutes for anybody who has for question and answers for any of our panelists. So if you would like to receive the mic, just feel free to put a hand up.
I think it's kind of permeating in the discussion. What are you guys' perspective on? My pastor would always say, God is not making any more land. And so your perspective on gentrification, especially as happening here in Atlanta, quite prevalent in most places. Can you all just speak a little bit further on what you've already said in regards to gentrification?
Okay. We have a situation where people will move into places because of the culture and then start changing the culture or complaining about the culture or calling the police on the culture or moving the culture outside of the neighborhood. I think you have people who will couch gentrification as upward mobility or change, or just trying to bring, change to the neighborhood. The problem is we don't have enough people who are on the ground floor who can provide the necessary pushback on some of that gentrification. Some of it is out of our control because, the people who are signing all the checks, they can make things happen, eminent domain and other things. But I think, Maya Angelou said, if you know better, you do better. I think if we can, those of us who know that this building has been around for 60 years or 70 years, somebody wants to buy it and put a Starbucks there. Like, we have to be the ones that jump in front of that. We have to go to the newspaper and say, do you know that this place was a place that Dr. King spoke at, or something else happened? They had meetings here. Like, you have to rabble rouse on some things. Like, some things you can't deal away with, but those things where you have important history. I got a friend of mine who lives in Macon, and there's a restaurant somewhere near downtown, and every time I'm there and I'm talking to him, he complains about that because they knocked down a church where King gave a speech that had all of this civil rights history to put this restaurant up. And so his irritation is he couldn't get enough people to stand with it and stop it, And so if we are going to be quiet about things like that when it comes to historical sites, then it's going to be hard for us to get mad when the McDonald's pops up or the gas station is there. And it's going to be up to us, those who know. I think some people just don't understand the history, doesn't know, but it's more on the folks who do know to share the message and make sure we get the word out. Where Queen Qued and Robert and I are, like, we know the value of that land. And so we have to be active in trying to tell people, look, don't sell your land, lease your land, rent your land, but don't give it away, because you're giving away for more money you've ever seen in your life, but it's worth 10 times that on the market, and so information is power. And if we're going to claim what we claim, we're all in some way preservationists, of history and power, right, and culture. But if we're going to claim that, that means that at the same time when stuff like that is happening, we have to be vocal. We have to stand up. And so, because some of us there's many ways to be vocal. Then I'll hand it off to my brother here. Like, I might not be able to get out here and completely jump in front of a situation because of how we're getting funded. But I can also have a program that brings in the heirs property groups to do public programs to show you resources and bring in people who can talk to these folks. There's ways to do advocacy. There's many ways to do advocacy, and we need to be creative with it and make sure that we're standing up for these things that deserve to be stood up for.
To briefly touch on gentrification, I can speak mostly to Austin, where I'm from and where I see it every day. I think gentrification has a lot to do with institutional policies that have been enacted over time, and we're seeing the results of them in real time by property laws, by changing communities. And I spent a lot of time reading city plans from the 1990s when I was a child. And when I look at some of these redevelopment plans, these urban renewal plans at that time, and I look at them in these spaces now, they read very similar to exactly what you see now. And they were extremely successful. And so that also sparks to me that these things just don't happen. That these are policies, these are people who meet weekly at these odd times when residents can't attend, don't have the education or the resources to be able to attend some of these meetings and partake in these decisions that slowly happen. We just increased the height limit in East Austin to 90 feet in height on corridor that happened within the last month, which means new condos are on the way because the height limit has been risen. And we haven't actively been able to participate in that. And there are people who participate, but there's a lot going on as well too that we have to be attentive to, that these policies enact and go. So I think that is extremely important when talking about gentrification, and then also talking about preservation. When I look at the preservation maps in historical districts in Austin, in historical sites in Austin that have historical designation and have preservation status, they look like every other map that we have that indicates on the basis of race, social, economic, it's divided in the same way. These neighborhoods west of IH-35 have these blue zones indicating that they are historical zones. In East Austin, the primary space where black residents have lived historically, there's very little spaces that are historically preserved. And that means the history of these spaces, when MLK or like people do these amazing and wonderful things, if they don't have the historical preservation, the status, the right status, and somebody purchase it, they don't have to ask questions when they want to knock down a property. In West Austin, you can't just go knock down a property in West Austin. You have to ask questions. You got to do this intensive, long survey. So many barriers you have to go through to make any adjustment to any historical building in West. That's not the case in East Austin. And it also goes to the historical, I would argue, the relationship that black people have had with the historical preservation offices and the mistrust that we've had in these offices. And even when they put together these equitable programs, it's like, how do we know we can trust you this time? And then also the barriers for Austin to get historical preservation at the city level in Austin is $2,500 application. You want me to put an application for $2,500 for you to tell me no? Who got that money for you to tell me no? I got to pay for you to tell me no. Because there's no guarantee that I'll get the status, and there's no guarantee you'll return my resources if I don't get the status. It's eaten up by them. And so we just don't even have an equitable playing field when these changes happen, when historical preservation is there, because the tools are historically hoarded by those groups of individuals that work in these mainstream preservation boards. And then when we do pull together and we do know the story and we try to articulate that, which I think is one of the most undervalued parts of gentrification and change in communities, is how changing communities and those members articulate the change that they're experiencing, which is often said to be these people are mad, they're just screaming, they don't know how to, they come to meetings and they show out, they speak out of turn, they don't go to the mic, they don't wait their turn, they do this and that. It's like, we also have to understand how people feel about a place. It's not just the monetary value of a place and what the appraisal boards of the county now say that this property is worth. We have to take into account when they say equity, and I'm talking about Austin specifically, because I'm going through this with the city of Austin right now. They talk about equity. I'm talking when you telling me about equity, and that's what you're taking into account, but you have to take into account when you made this part of town the Negro District in 1928, and you refuse to invest in these services. You didn't even enforce coding in this services. So you see homes that have operated as businesses in residential at the same time. But now in 2024, you're telling me we out of code. You didn't have nothing to say in the 40s. You didn't have nothing to say in the 50s. You didn't have nothing to say in the 60s. But now, when we're trying to get something and progress and get more resources, we out of code. You have to take into account your intentional neglect of this space over these last decades, and then also understand when we are screaming and we were saying this and we are emotional and it sounds like we are irate, that's also an expression that is invaluable. That we can't just place a price tag on it and say that this property is in proximity to downtown and the properties within close proximity have now been valued at $1 million, and so we'll give you an equitable raise because these people's properties have been appraised at the same value. Man, the hell with that. I mean, literally. You telling me something that I don't care about. You know, but we have to realize that as well, how people think about a place that has changed, and how do we recognize and value people's feelings towards a place. And when we can't put a price tag on how somebody feels about a place, how can we incorporate that into our policies that we enact on preserving a place, and for people to preserve the spaces that they want to be in. And so I think it's just a whole series of things that end up coming out as something new building is put up there.
Well, can we please give these gentlemen another round of applause? And we thank you for your words, but most importantly, we thank you for your knowledge and your expertise and what you do. And we look forward to learning more about you all and your work, and hopefully Morehouse College can receive that knowledge again someday. And now I will hand it off to Kandaji to guide you all and lead you all to the next part of the program.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Thank you.